Hello folks, J. Scott Phillips here, and today we are bound for adventure with a look at Pacific Vortex, the very first DIRK PITT novel written by Clive Cussler. And this is the second week now already of Spring into Adventure, which is a new BookTube event created for the month of August by Mark at Book Time for Elvis and Sean D. Standfast. Now, they are the creators and the hosts of Spring into Adventure, but they have a few co-hosts as well that are helping them out through the month, and I will leave links to all of their channels in the notes down below. But what they have done is invited the rest of us to read adventure fiction and nonfiction along with them through the month of April. And so that's why I'm joining in, not a host or co-host myself, but an adventure fan going way back. And that's one of the great things about adventure, is that it crosses into all genres of literature. So whatever kind of books you like to read, you can find some examples of adventure in any of those genres. It really cuts a wide swath through all of literature. So I've been wanting to kind of touch into the DIRK PITT novels for quite a while, and Spring into Adventure is giving me a great chance to do that. Now, I say this is the second week. The second week is to focus on adventure fiction of the long form, longer than 200 pages, or 200 pages or more. And even though I do say this is the second week, I know that we're kind of standing on the threshold of the third week now. I'm running a little behind, but that's due to some, I guess, adventures of my own. So we'll just, hopefully it's not too late to catch up here, and we will move ahead. So DIRK PITT, what about this guy? So he is, of course, Clive Cussler's famous adventure hero, who was first introduced to the reading public in 1973 with the novel The Mediterranean Caper, and then probably more to general audiences a few years later in 1976 when the movie Raise the Titanic came out, which was based on the fourth printed DIRK PITT novel. And then some years later, 2005, the Matthew McConaughey movie Sahara, which was based on the 11th DIRK PITT novel. Now, DIRK PITT is Clive Cussler's premier character who works for NUMA, N-U-M-A, which stands for National Underwater Marine Agency, NUMA. And what they do is they will dive onto wrecks of all kinds. They might be old ships or planes or even locomotives, all kinds of different sunken vessels or craft. And it might be to recover a lost treasure or to salvage or resurrect these lost crafts of whatever type, and they might be anywhere on Earth. Cussler will find himself diving in oceans primarily, but often also lakes and rivers, and probably more often than not into glasses of tequila, his favorite drink. Now, he will often be accompanied by his best pal since childhood, Al Giordino, kind of this burly Italian fellow, and they've been friends forever. And Giordino is the character who will risk anything for the sake of solving DIRK PITT's problems along the way, and will always share in his adventures. And then there's usually a girlfriend thrown in there somewhere for DIRK PITT, or a femme fatale, and that will always complicate matters. But wherever DIRK PITT goes, there is always going to be adventure, underwater adventure of some kind. Now, as I say, he was first introduced to the reading public in The Mediterranean Caper. That was actually the second book that Cussler wrote featuring DIRK PITT. And so we're going to look at how Clive Cussler came up with the character here in the first section of this video, and then we'll talk about how he managed to get the series launched and eventually Pacific Vortex published, and set it first in the chronology of the sequence of stories. And then, as I usually like to do, we'll then take a look towards the end here at some of the cover art for the books that we have gotten to see over the years. So to get started here, let's take a look at Clive Cussler himself. Clive Cussler was born in Aurora, Illinois in 1931, and when he was about 6, his father was transferred to Los Angeles, where the family moved into the LA suburb of Alhambra around 1937. And that's where Cussler, as a teenager, got into body surfing at a lot of the local beaches and was getting interested in tinkering with old jalopies and hot rods of the day. And then after high school, he joined the Air Force for flight training during the Korean War, and he was hoping that he would be sent to Germany, but instead the Air Force sent him to Hickam Field, which is the air base right next to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. So he wound up there, where he was able at least to continue his interest in the beach culture and eventually more and more into the sea itself. And while he was stationed there, he met Al Giordano, who became a lifelong friend of his and who he based his character Al Giordino on in the DIRK PITT novels. Notice how he changed the name there so we would never guess who the character was actually based on. And then in their off hours, these two pals would go diving offshore, and Cussler was falling more and more in love with the ocean and with diving. After his service with the Air Force, he returned home to Alhambra, California, where he settled down. He got married to his wife, Barbara, in 1955. They got married in Pasadena. But they settled in Alhambra, and due to Cussler's interest in working on cars, he and a partner bought a mobile gas station in Alhambra and started to have all kinds of adventures, you might say, just dealing with the gas station. They were held up, burglarized, they got cheated and fleeced a lot, they were vandalized. So all kinds of little bits of daring do that were adventurous in Cussler's mind. And he fell into the habit of coming to the aid of local motorists whenever he could. Someone would be driving by, breaking down, come hobbling into the gas station on flat tires or whatever, an accident on the freeway, which was just a block away from the gas station there. So he was always going out and helping motorists whenever he could to do that, and had a lot of close calls with the local traffic and other things, just doing that alone. And he started to think, the gas station is doing really well, but there are a lot of pitfalls, you might say, and we're having all these adventures. I could probably write a book about these little adventures here. So he was starting to think about writing and kind of giving them colorful spins and things to put more adventure into the stories to make it a little more interesting than just reading about a couple of guys running a gas station. Well, as I say, the gas station was doing pretty well for a while, and they started to have dreams of expanding. But Mobil Oil Corporation said, "No, we're not going to let you do that. We don't want to go into competition with ourselves in the market there, and we're trying to give all these little franchises to individual owners around the area. So you just stick to your one gas station. It's doing fine by you, and you'll be fine." So they started to realize that, well, at this point, there's really no way of moving ahead beyond our little gas station here. So they sold the gas station and went their separate ways. So Cussler drifted for a little while, but he was starting to think more and more about writing. But he needed money in order to support his family, which was starting to grow now. And he wound up getting a job at a little grocery store on Lido Island in Newport Beach. And what his job there was to do was to come up with ads and promotions to sell items at the grocery store. And he found that he was pretty good at it. He could come up with ways of selling and laying out ads and then running them in the newspapers. So he was finding out that he had a knack for this and wound up getting into advertising and marketing. And then this is where I start to kind of get interested in Clive Cussler's background here, because I was an art director myself most of my career in advertising and marketing. So it's fun to catch up with Cussler's early days here and seeing what he was doing. And he started working for an ad agency in Los Angeles. He was still living in, at that time they were living in Costa Mesa. So it was a long commute from the beach cities in Orange County into Los Angeles, where he worked at these ad agencies. But he was working on some pretty big national accounts there. And I usually like to talk about artwork on this channel, so I thought, I wonder if I could find some of Cussler's old campaigns. He did stuff for, I got a little list here, Budweiser, Ajax Detergent, Royal Crown Cola, Bank of America. And this was back in the early 60s, kind of the Mad Men era. I couldn't find any examples of him, but he was winning awards through the Orange County Ad Club, which I belonged to for many years. So I just found that interesting. But that's where he was becoming a creative director and inventing campaigns and ways of selling these big national accounts. And but he was feeling like that commute into LA every day, the traffic and the smog and just the headaches involved and all that, would take a couple hours out of your day just to come and go from work. And it was just becoming a slog, even though he was enjoying the marketing. The drive itself and his family living in Orange County was just, it was a stretch. And so he was thinking more and more about, okay, what if I do get into writing here? What can I do? I want to come up with a unique kind of a character. Now, he had grown up reading a lot of adventure fiction, characters like Alan Quatermain and Tarzan, Doc Savage, those kinds of grand old adventure characters. And he wanted to write something along those lines. Not so much along the current style in the 60s of the secret agent. Wasn't so much interested in that. He wanted a classic type of adventure character, but still had to be something different. What could it be? And so as a big guy in marketing in those days, he liked doing his own research. So he started to kind of look into what are the successful characters, serial characters that he had kind of grown up with as well. Characters like Sherlock Holmes and detectives, private eyes and things. He didn't want to do that. He wanted more of an adventurer. What could it be? It's got to be different. So he started to draw on his own experiences overseas in the Air Force, where he had learned to fly. He had been an amateur diver. He loved to tinker on cars, so he was a pretty good mechanic. All these kinds of things started to form into the character and personality of DIRK PITT. And then he could write adventures using a character like this anywhere in the world, but the key was that they would always be underwater. That was the difference that he was looking for. And so he started working on his first novel, came up with the idea for Pacific Vortex, and was writing that while he was still working in Los Angeles in advertising. And got it finished and started sending it off to different publishers, and they were just coming back, rejection after rejection. It wasn't selling. And he started thinking, well, maybe he's not that good yet. He's got to write more and kind of learn his craft. But in the meantime, he got a promotion at work. Big promotion on some national accounts that were pretty big time. Huge advance now, or not advance, but a raise, big raise. But he still had that commute to deal with every day, which he hated. And his wife, Barbara, said, you know, what are you doing? I thought you wanted to write these sea adventures. Why don't you turn down that promotion in L.A. and take a job, something like this? And she had an ad in the paper for this little dive shop down the street from where they lived in Orange County. And it only paid $400 a month, but she said, you'll be happier doing something like this. You'll learn about diving. You won't have that drive into LA every day and back, and you can take that extra time to write more. And he thought, you know, she could be onto something here. I could get away with that drop in income for a little while anyway, and I'll give it a try. So he did get the job at the little dive shop in, I think it was in Newport Beach. And he started to learn more about the diving community, and he got certified as a diver and wound up being a dive master on these expeditions to Catalina and back. and had a lot of adventures along the way and started to work those into his second novel, The Mediterranean Caper. He was working on that during this time. And after a couple of years of this, he was enjoying it and learning a lot. But the family income was taking a hit here, and so he realized he had to go back to advertising after all, at least for a little while. And so he did that, but he had a plan. He knew he had to make a change and get more into this writing, but he realized he needed a literary agent, and he just couldn't sell these things on his own. So he went to his art director at the agency and had him design a logo and a set of printed stationery for a fake literary agent, Charles Winthrop. And through his contacts at the agency, he knew some people and names to try to get in touch with in New York City at a real literary agency, the William Morris Agency. So he sent his manuscripts off with a letter to Peter Lampback at William Morris, and he wrote this letter on that stationery. And here, I'll just read it to you. It said, "Dear Peter, as you know, I primarily handle motion picture and television screenplays. However, I've run across a pair of book-length manuscripts which I think have a great deal of potential. I would pursue them, but am retiring soon. Would you like to take a look at them? Signed, Charlie Winthrop." And Peter Lampback got this and was thinking, do I know this guy? It sounds like it's somebody I know. Probably somebody I met at a cocktail party or something. But okay, so he took a look at the manuscripts and didn't really like one, but liked the other. And so he wrote back after a little while, and Cussler got the letter back saying, "Dear Charlie, read the manuscripts. The first one is only fair, but the second one looks good. Where can I sign Cussler to a contract?" So Cussler's little trick actually worked, and he felt that now that he had a contract with a real literary agency in New York City, he could take some chances and put more of his plan into effect. So he quit the agency in Los Angeles once and for all, and he moved his now growing family to Colorado, where things were quieter, and he could get everyone away from the rat race and the traffic and the smog of Los Angeles once and for all. And so now, having resettled in Colorado, he had expenses to meet, and after the move and all, buying a house, and realized that he was, in fact, have to get back to work in advertising. But he wouldn't have the commute to deal with, and the stress was a lot lower in Colorado. And so he got a job at another advertising agency in Colorado, at least for now. And then that brings us to a point in the video here where we can start to chart the progress of Dirk Pitt novels getting published up to the publication of Pacific Vortex. It's a little complex, but it's interesting along the way. So let's just put up a little chart here and I'll walk you through it. So just to back up a little bit here, we already talked about how Cussler had already written his first Dirk Pitt adventure, Pacific Vortex, and had sent that around to various publishers himself with absolutely no hits whatsoever. But then he got his foot in the door at the William Morris Agency with Peter Lampback, and had provided Lampback with the Pacific Vortex and the Mediterranean Caper manuscripts. Lampback did not care for Pacific Vortex, so it wound up getting retired to an old shoebox in Cussler's closet. But Lampback did like the Mediterranean Caper and was promoting that to publishers, but unfortunately was not getting much of a response. However, the signing of the contract did encourage Cussler to start writing his third Dirk Pitt adventure, Iceberg. And he sent that off to Lampback, and now Lampback had two manuscripts to send around. But after a couple of more years of this, of rejection letters, and a change in management at his Colorado ad agency, Cussler wound up losing that job and was out of work again. So this didn't stop him as far as writing. Now he had even more time to write, so he sat down and wrote his fourth Dirk Pitt adventure, this time Raise the Titanic. Now, as luck would have it, just in the nick of time, Lampbeck was able to sell the Mediterranean Caper to Pyramid Books for $5,000, and it was published as a paperback in November of 1973. And in 1974, it wound up getting nominated as one of the top 5 paperback mysteries of 1973 by the Mystery Writers of America. And about 6 months after that little bit of good news, Dodd Mead and Company bought Iceberg for another $5,000 and published it as a hardback in September of 1975. Raise the Titanic was finished by then, so Cussler sent it off to Lampbeck, who sent it off to then Dodd Mead, but Dodd Mead rejected it immediately. So Lampbeck sent it off to Putnam, who was interested in it, but they wanted a major rewrite, and Cussler didn't want to have anything to do with that at all, so he refused. But then, out of the deep blue sea, Viking Press bought Raise the Titanic for $7,500, and it was published again as a hardback in October of 1976. Cussler wanted to get the rights back to the Mediterranean Caper, which, since it was out of print and no plans for a reprint, it had not been doing that well. Pyramid Books just signed the rights back over to him. And then, since he'd always imagined Dirk Pitt as primarily a paperback series, he bought the paperback rights from Dodd Mead for Iceberg for $5,000 out of his own pocket. And by now, the interest in the UK for Raise the Titanic was rippling across the pond to America, and a bidding war broke out between American paperback publishers for the rights in the American market. And Bantam wound up winning that bid for $840,000 and published it in October of 1977. Now, it wasn't until then that Bantam learned that there were 2 earlier Dirk Pitt novels that had been published, and they didn't want their new acquisition to be in competition with other publishers, so they bought the rights for the Mediterranean Caper and Iceberg directly from Cussler for $40,000 each, and published both of them a couple of months after Raise the Titanic in December of 1977. And shortly after that, Lampbeck sold the movie rights to Raise the Titanic. Now it was going to be made into a motion picture, and Cussler was really off and running then, and so he got back to work and started his next Dirk Pitt novel, Vixen '03. Cussler finished that manuscript the next year, and it was sent off to Viking Press. They still had the first option on any new Dirk Pitt novels, and they published it as a hardback in October of 1978. The next year, Bantam published the paperback edition of Vixen '03 in October of '79, and Cussler was writing his 6th Dirk Pitt book at this time, Night Probe. Unfortunately, around this time, Viking Press was sold to Penguin Books in the UK, and they had no interest in promoting any Dirk Pitt novels. So, with no help coming from Penguin Books now, Cussler wanted out, but he was still legally bound to the Dodd Mead contract, but he wanted to get out of that. So he sent them an older manuscript, some other thing that he had written, not a Dirk Pitt novel. It was not very good at all. And so Penguin rejected it immediately. And that met Cussler's obligation to provide them with one more novel. But since they didn't take it, that freed Cussler to look for another hardback publisher. And then just about that time, Bantam wanted to break into the hardback market, so Night Probe, then, the next Dirk Pitt novel in line here, could go to a happy home. And then one day, Cussler was discussing some minor revisions to the manuscript for Night Probe with Bantam, and a new editor asked where did Night Probe fit into the sequence with the other Dirk Pitt novels, and Cussler said, well, it was the 6th book, and he had first introduced Dirk Pitt in Pacific Vortex, which had never been published. And the new editor said, what? There's another Dirk Pitt book out there somewhere? Well, when can you send it to me? And Cussler said, no way. If you publish that thing, it will ruin us all. It was that bad. Well, Bantam published Night Probe as a hardback in August of 1981, and then as a paperback the following April. But in the meantime, Pacific Vortex was kind of needling Cussler. He hadn't really looked at it for 15 years. So he pulled it out of mothballs and he reread it and decided that he actually still liked the story. He just felt that the writing was so bad, he had improved a lot over the years. So he took about 3 months and rewrote it. When he was finally happy with the story and the writing, he sent it off into Bantam, and at long last, Pacific Vortex was published in January of 1983. And that brings us to the first adventure of Dirk Pitt outside of the publishing world. And I've read a number of the Dirk Pitt novels over the years, several of them anyway, not by any means all of them. There's a ton of them out there. But I was reading them in no particular order, just kind of as they maybe came out or when I picked up a new one in the bookstore, in no particular sequence. But a few years ago, I thought, if I'm going to read these, I should probably start at the beginning. And so I thought I would start with the publication order, not really realizing that there was this Pacific Vortex floating out there that came sequentially first. I started with the Mediterranean Caper and was pretty disappointed with it. And this was after I'd read a few other Dirk Pitt novels, which I always enjoyed. They were a lot of fun. But the Mediterranean Caper just did not come up to snuff for me, at least. So when I decided a couple of weeks ago for Spring into Adventure to start with Pacific Vortex, I was a little concerned because I thought if he wrote this before Mediterranean Caper, it's not going to be even that good. However, saying that Pacific Vortex is the first written Dirk Pitt adventure is a little misleading because before it got published, Cussler rewrote it completely, or maybe not completely. I'm not sure of that, but he did major rewrites for it to bring it up to what he felt was the level of his writing by Vixen 03 Night Probe time anyway. So that was much better than how I felt Mediterranean Caper was doing. So that was a big relief. And even though he rewrote it and it was published as the 6th Dirk Pitt novel in publication order, Cussler himself always said that it was written to be the first in chronological order. So he always recommended that his readers start with that and then go in publication order after that. So, as I say, a big relief, and it turned out that it was actually a lot of fun. I got the feeling that all the technical descriptions of the subs and the ships and such things, planes and all that, were technically accurate. So I feel like Cussler knew his stuff and was able to write it in an entertaining way that made it feel realistic. And I'm sure it's all pretty accurate. One of the things that makes the book kind of interesting is he suggests a supernatural aspect to it. It's the Pacific Vortex itself is kind of a Pacific version of the Bermuda Triangle that is somewhere north of Hawaii in kind of waters that are not that well explored. But ships have been going missing there for years and years and years. And according to legend, now the legend has only been really around since like maybe the 1920s or so. But according to the legend, there are ships that were lost there, old sailing ships going back a couple of hundred years even, perhaps. But it is known that in the last several years, that many ships, modern ships, have disappeared completely in that area or somewhere out there without a trace. So there is this mysterious zone in the Pacific Ocean that has claimed most recently the Navy's new research vessel, the Starbuck. And it's on its trial runs and disappears completely. And the book actually starts out with a little prologue describing the last few hours or minutes of the Starbuck and what's going on the sub at the time, this super sub. And they don't know what's going on, and the lights go out. And then that brings us to the actual beginning of the novel here, which I think is a good way to start, or really is introducing us to Dirk Pitt. He's now, no spoilers in this book here, but I just want to kind of outline why, for me, it works so well in so many aspects. And that we are introduced to Dirk Pitt. He's just kind of relaxing all by himself, all alone on this deserted beach a few miles west of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And as he's just kind of relaxing there, he sees this little yellow something bobbing up and down offshore about 100 yards, and decides that he's going to go and see what it is. But we really kind of are introduced to Dirk Pitt here and what he's all about, because we understand all these dangerous riptides and things, and what is the danger of going out to retrieve this thing that he has no idea what it is. But off he goes to do it. He feels compelled to do it. And then, of course, adventure ensues, because there are these dangerous riptides and things. So you get to know the character of Dirk Pitt right off the bat in just this moment of rumination and compulsion that he feels. And then the story kind of goes off from there. So this Admiral Hunter now is calling on Dirk Pitt to go and reclaim this missing sub, the Starbuck. It's a new, highly experimental and very important research and strategic vessel, nuclear powered, of course, that has disappeared, and they have no idea where it was. They lost radio contact with them during that prologue at the beginning of the book here. And they cannot afford to let that fall into the Soviet hands, still during the Cold War here. So Dirk Pitt is assigned to go out and find it and recover it, if possible, before the Russians can get a hold of it. And the mystery of the Pacific Vortex, this kind of fog-enshrouded area, this fog comes and goes without warning or understanding, has this supernatural aspect to it. And Dirk Pitt, of course, does not believe in any of that. And I will say that Cussler handles it pretty well, kind of like in the early Dean Koontz books, where there is supposedly this supernatural thing going on, and then we come to understand what's really going on through the story. Handled really well, keeps us guessing all the way through and turning the pages. Very enjoyable. And knowing a little bit about the Bermuda Triangle, the reader then kind of projects, okay, what would that be like in the Pacific, and what happens to these ships and all that, and what's the real story going on here? How true is this piece of folklore? So there's a girlfriend involved who, of course, happens to be the Admiral's daughter. That's not going too well. That's kind of falling apart. Enter a femme fatale that is going to muddy up the waters here pretty badly for Dirk Pitt. And then there is a villain. Now, I had said earlier that when Cussler was coming up with the idea for Dirk Pitt, he didn't really want to do any kind of a secret agent kind of a thing. However, the villain in this particular book, Pacific Vortex, is right out of a Bond movie. He is a Bond villain, right down to having an undersea lair with his minions and all, where they can commit acts of piracy, world domination. All of that is in the plans, and so we've got to deal with that. But it's a compelling character. His name is Delphi, after the Oracle of Delphi from Greek mythology. So that all ties in with this mysterious zone in the Pacific, the Vortex. And off it goes. It's a really fun read. I have to say, I enjoyed quite a bit of it. There were a couple of things that gave me pause. There's some dialogue between Al Giordino and Dirk Pitt, which seem a little forced and a little corny, not quite believable. I'm not sure Cussler was good at writing authentic dialogue quite yet, but the action is all there. The setups are all there. One thing I was nervous about for a minute is that about halfway through the book, Pitt is confronted by Delphi, the villain. And so Pitt is trying to get some information out of him, and Delphi is not falling for it. And he says, "Oh, you're not going to trick me into monologuing here. I'm not going to explain my evil plan," and leaves Pitt to his fate there. And I thought that was a close one. However, later in the book, towards the end, and their worlds crashing down around them towards the end of the story here, Cussler spends an entire chapter, 20 pages of Pitt and Delphi talking back and forth, and the whole thing is explained. Now, I understand that Cussler has to explain. He's got to have an info dump at some point to explain the whole thing to the reader. But he had already said, no, I'm not going to explain my evil plan. And then he takes so long to do it towards the end that it just seemed a little unbelievable. And then there's one other unbelievable thing to me. That is the budding love affair between the femme fatale and DIRK PITT. Early on, she's basically trying to do anything she can to kill DIRK PITT. And then somewhere during this story, something must shift. We're not really shown how this happens or why, but they wind up falling in love with each other for some inexplicable reason. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but if you're going to have that in there, show us what happens that shifts things so completely. Now, that bothered me, but I realized that that particular character, the femme fatale, does become important in future novels. So there's that to deal with. I just didn't like the way it was handled, and maybe it was that Cussler was not that good at constructing such a relationship in his books at that time. But anyway, overall, it was a real rip snorter of an adventure, and I enjoyed it completely, and it's kind of rejuvenated my enthusiasm to read more DIRK PITT novels. So if you've never read any yourself, this is a good place to start, and I would recommend it on that score anyway. So that's kind of my reflections on the story itself, and now let's end the video here with the last section, and we'll talk about some of the book covers that we got for Pacific Vortex since its first publication. There are 4 editions we'll take a look at here. They are all the American editions, and we'll start here with the very first release of Bantam Books, January 1983, for the Pacific Vortex, with the cover by Lou Glanzman. Now, Cussler himself was very pleased with this cover that Bantam put out, the inaugural cover for this title. The type, that white type that's on there, is embossed, so it has a three-dimensional kind of a texture to it, as well as that porthole on the bottom left corner there. All the rivets and contours of the porthole are in stark relief there, so you can feel the elements of the porthole itself in 3D. But then it has that porthole is a die-cut window, a little circle hole in the cover that when you open it up, you get this really neat, full, double-spread illustration of a diver diving onto the wreck of the Starbuck and some of the other ships that have fallen down nearby. The diver we see here is DIRK PITT himself, and he is carrying what looks like a spear, but that's actually a kind of a shark repeller. It's a device that has a cartridge on one end that has compressed gas in it, and what you do if a shark is getting too close, you poke the shark with that thing, and it injects that canister into the shark's body, where it opens up and expands very quickly, all the gases in that cartridge, and basically explodes the shark from within. So a very dangerous device this thing is. Only problem is you get one canister at a time, so one shot and that's it. So hopefully you're not being ganged up by too many sharks. But it's a really cool illustration. Now, we do see some of the other ships that have sunk nearby here. They're really too close together based on the description in the story. And in the very background there, we can see an old sailing ship that sunk. That is not actually accurate to the story. According to the legend, sure, ships have been disappearing there for a couple of centuries, but in reality, this only goes back about 30 years. Now, these die-cut covers with the step-back illustration on the inside are great in one respect, and that is that you really get that nice big illustration rather than being just confined to a little narrow cover on the front like usual. But there's a big problem with it, and that is that once you're done reading that book and you put it on the bookshelf, the next time you slide a paperback in front of that book, the back cover of the paperback will often get caught in the die cut of the first paperback here and just cut right through the cover like a knife. And I don't like that at all. That can ruin the book completely. That's not the illustrator's fault, though. So let's take a look at the next book here, Bantam's 1994 re-release of Pacific Vortex with cover art by Bob Larkin this time. I really like the shift to red for a cover in this case here. I think it's more unexpected, and it might be suggestive of the possible undersea volcano origin of the Pacific Vortex that is theorized in the book. And it looks a little brighter on the shelf, I think, than the underwater blue that you would normally expect to see. But as an art director myself, I am not a fan of that tall, narrow illustration there. I was just talking about how that double spread illustration on the step back cover we just looked at was so nice because you had a much wider image to look at and explore rather than just what you have available on a cover. And this one doesn't even give you that. So that really bothers me. So just comparing it to the Glanzman cover that we just looked at here side by side, it looks to me like both Glanzman and Larkin were given the same source image to work from here. The diver is in exactly the same position. One has more bubbles coming off his back than on the other, but it's the same exact position and pose, even down to the shark stick there that DIRK PITT is holding. And I think you could just maybe agree with me that if you're wise, that the wider image on a book cover is more impactful. Now, what I'm showing here is just half of the step back from the other book to look at here, so we don't have the problem with type sitting on top of it and all that. But usually an illustrator, when they are commissioned to do a cover for a paperback, will paint the thing 2 up, meaning it's twice the size of the actual paperback book cover. So rather than having this tall, narrow image here, I would rather that the production artist, whoever was putting this cover together, designing it, would have shown us more of that image side to side and given us more of a landscape to look at, even though the type is going to cover up the top half of it there. So that was an unfortunate decision in my book. However, doing some research for this video, I came across the original art by Bob Larkin for this that was sold at auction at some point, and shows you how much I know. Apparently, this was commissioned to be in this particular shape, tall and narrow like that. So that's what the artist gave Bantam to use, and so they had this narrow column of artwork here. And apparently this was what they were doing for the DIRK PITT novels that were coming out at the time. Here's a couple more examples in the same line. So at that point, I start to like it better because it's part of a series and a branded look of the book covers. And that helps. It also is nice to see them, that they're all going to be in kind of different colors that make a nice family of paperbacks once you have them all together on a shelf. So far, I'm liking what Bantam has been giving us in both of these editions of the paperback illustrations here. Some things work better than others in both cases, but I think as far as the illustrations go in themselves, it's really nice artwork and really pays off the adventure of DIRK PITT in the Pacific Vortex. But then in 2010, Bantam gave us this. This one is a disappointment to me, to be honest. The image on the cover is pretty hard to see. Everything is so far away or small or murky. The colors are clashing. That red at the top just does not go with the blue in the middle or the sandy yellow at the bottom. Not very well composed, I don't think. There's no illustrator given credit here. Instead, the only art credit goes to National Geographic photojournalist Brian Skerry, who took a lot of underwater images back in his day, and a lot of scuba divers and just the the cool undulating waters and things with looking up to the surface with the sunlight scattering through the waters. Some beautiful photography, really. But they didn't really use that. They just used the diver. The only thing of his in this image is the diver itself. And it's so small that it hardly seems worth it. They even painted the light beam coming off of his lamp there, and the bubbles are all dubbed in. And the shipwreck that we see underwater there, that's also added in. That's from another image. And then, of course, the beach sand, or the sand along the ocean floor, that's a separate image that's been added in. It did give the designer here a chance to kind of fake a wraparound cover, but I don't think it's very convincing at all. These images are just kind of blended into one another, tops and bottoms, and they don't feel like a real image at all. Now, I hope that Brian Skerry got some kind of a royalty for Bantam using his diver. But considering how small the image of the diver actually is, it probably wasn't really worth it to buy the rights to use it. Although they might have kind of stretched their penny a little bit here by repeating the diver again on the spine. But that's about it. Overall, this cover just does not really work for me. You might feel differently, and if you do, maybe let me know. But this one, I would want to just get a better cover that would work just equally as well in a line of DIRK PITT novels that all match the same style of covers, like the first two could have done. This one, if there was a line of DIRK PITT novels following this format, I don't think they would really sell me on them very well. I don't think they look that good. Sorry. And that brings us here to the last cover we're going to look at outside of the Bantam publishing here. This was published in 2000 by James Cahill Publishing, and it's a special signed limited edition of only 300 copies with a cover illustration by David Monette. And this strikes me as one of those collector's items that once sold to its initial audience, its market is pretty much saturated. And it's kind of a done deal. So don't know if there's much resale value in this. I might be wrong. I'm not that familiar with the artist David Monette as far as his popularity, other than his work as a fantasy and science fiction artist and writer, in fact. And he does some pretty nice line art illustrations and some color illustrations as well, where he really gets into some fine detail. I don't think he's particularly good at drawing people or realistic scenes, but in fantasy, there's a lot of forgiving aspects to his artwork there, and he really does go in for some nice detail and some interesting compositions, I think, in a lot of cases. But when it comes down to this particular cover and this particular assignment, so anchored in reality, you might say, I think it kind of falls short, at least for me. It looks nice in a general way, but our diver here, that's supposedly DIRK PITT again, I would assume, looks like he's just been kind of walking along underwater and then was surprised. Almost got a kind of a Sasquatch look to him there. And why is he looking right at the camera here, or if there is a camera in illustration? The problem for me is that there's just no adventure in this illustration. There's no action. There's no motion. It's just kind of stark, and everything is just centered on the cover. Now, when you open the book up, you do get this kind of nice wraparound here where you see some of the sunken ships behind DIRK PITT here. And it does come in this neat slipcase. But when we open the book inside and we see the signatures, this is what you're really paying for. This edition, by the way, would cost you $700 to buy it. And I think it's the Cussler signature there that is carrying most of the value of this particular edition. But even Cussler's signature you can get for somewhere between $20 and $80 if you buy a signed edition of any one of his paperback books on eBay these days. So you might want to save your $700 for that, unless you're a big fan of David Monette. But if you are, it's probably not for this particular DIRK PITT cover. It's probably going to be for some of his more fantastic artwork of fantasy and science fiction, I would think. So there's that problem with this one. So of all of the covers that we've looked at here so far, either one of the first two, I think, has the best illustrations and that I would want to have on my own bookshelf. How about you? What do you think? Do you have a favorite out of all of these books? And I'll put them all up on the screen together here one last time so you can take a look at it. And if you do have a favorite, let me know in the comments down below, because I love talking about these kinds of things and chatting about artwork in particular. Or if you are a Dirk Pitt fan in general, maybe you've got a favorite book you'd like to talk about. Maybe we can discuss that at some point down the line here. And so there you have it, folks. Thanks again to the hosts and creators of Spring into Adventure, Mark over at Book Time with Elvis and Sean D. Standfast over at Sean D. Standfast. And I'll let you get back to reading whatever adventures you are into at the moment. And until we get a chance to meet again, thanks a lot.